Okay, so hello, my name is Aslen Feaster. Today I'm sitting down with Natasha Ashe-Suber. Thank you again for sitting down with me. Today we're going to talk about your successful career in PR and just go into all of those questions. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Aslen, for having me. I was honored when you reached out to me to ask me to, engage in this conversation with you. So thank you for thinking of me.
No problem, of course, of course. So I'm going to start off by talking about just like what public relations is, maybe just defining it in terms of how the Public Relations Society of America would. So it's defined
Which
as.
I'm a member. I am a member of the PRSA. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm actually on the Charlotte chapter board, and I am a member of the Public Relations Society of America Southeast District Board. So that includes like Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, of course, North and South Carolina. So, and would love to get you involved in PRSA.
I recently filled out like the application and did the thing on 1891 Connect so I could join. They accepted my membership, so maybe next year I'll be a little bit more involved in it for real.
Well, would love that. Would love to have you engaged in that way.
Yes. So they do define it as a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and their publics. Just, how would you interpret it, your own personal interpretation or explanation of public relations?
I mean, I think PRSA defines it well, obviously. It is about engaging with publics, making sure that you are positively representing whatever brand or client that you are working for or with. And just ensuring that the clients and audiences who engage with that brand know all the things about that particular brand or company. So it is publicity, promotions, media relations. I know we'll talk about like issues management in crisis communication, employee engagement. I mean, there's so many aspects to public relations, which is what I love about the profession. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you today, and also to share a little bit about sort of what I do and how I arrived in this place.
Great. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit more about yourself? Some like, where you're from, your professional accolades, your educational accolades, all that, where you went to school. Um, yeah.
Right. Well, as you know, I am a proud Aggie. I
Yeah.
am a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, is where I earned my undergraduate degree. Spent a lot of time in Crosby Hall during my tenure at A&T. I was a print journalism major, so my interest was in writing initially, and I worked as a reporter for several years before I made that transition from the newsroom to the public relations and communications profession, which oftentimes is a parallel move that so many journalists make. My skill set as a journalist, meaning my writing, my communications and interview skills, in a, I guess, a more consistent environment, meaning like that sort of 8 to 5. Although as a public relations practitioner, if there's a crisis or an event, it's not always 8 to 5, but it's a little bit more structured than working in a newsroom, I will say. So I received my undergraduate degree from North Carolina A&T, and I went on to earn a master's or graduate degree in liberal studies and communications.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So why did you select PR necessarily like as a career profession? Like I know you said it kind of just, that's usually the automatic move when you move from journalism to PR. It's not, a shock. But what really was like, this is it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a great question. Like I said, honestly, I sort of PR found me. Like I really was ready to leave the newsroom after several years, and actually saw my first public relations job was at UNC Greensboro. So I worked in higher education for several years. I worked at 3 universities total. So higher education is one of the industries, and we'll get into that just a little bit more later. But the great thing about working in public relations and communications is that the field is so broad. If you think about a major brand that you love or like, there's typically a PR person or a public relations agency promoting that brand. So that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to transition into public relations is because I figured, one, just like working in the newsroom, no day would be the same. And then secondly, I knew that there were vast opportunities in whatever, industry or career path that I selected. Like, if I wanted to, work for a retailer, I know that, there are public relations and communications jobs that exist within, that retailer. So, but to go back to your original question, A&T graduate, master's degree from UNC Greensboro. I am a native of Shelby, North Carolina. And I currently am the assistant vice president for client marketing, communications, and communities for a reinsurance, a global reinsurance company. It's the insurance reinsurance. So to sort of get, for people who don't know what reinsurance is, it's a financial services. But our company, we're the fourth largest in the world. Our company insures the insurance companies, if that makes sense. Never thought I'd be working in this industry, but it's been fascinating.
Okay, so how long would you say like you've been working in the PR field? I know you've done journalism, but for PR, how long have you been working in that field?
Approximately, I think this year was year 20. So this is a milestone year for me in the profession. So I've worked in public relations, communications, and marketing for 20 years.
Good, a lot of longevity in there.
Absolutely.
So what would you say? I know networking is a big part of like what we talk about in class. We've covered that, and we talked about how important it is to make connections, not just with your careers, potential employers, but making communications, networking within your peers, your professors, your all of that. So how important are relationships in PR?
Oh my gosh. If without relationships, I couldn't successfully or effectively do what I do. Whether it's, relationships with journalists or media outlets or, editors of publications, other PR practitioners, relationships with clients, relationships with other practitioners who may work in partner, like within my industry, we've got a lot of partner organizations. So even collaborating with partners is important because you rely on other people to do your job effectively. Trying to think about other relationships. Mentioned the media relations component because reporters help you to tell your story, and just even co-workers and colleagues. Every day, Aslen, I spend time working with the department heads of business units, all across the globe to be able to tell the SCORE story to our clients. I've always worked in B2C, like business to consumer. This is the first job, honestly, that I've had where it's been B2B, just business to business, because we promote ourselves to our clients, our partners, and prospective clients, of course. So without relationships or cultivating relationships internally, as an example, our team couldn't be successful. I currently lead the communications and marketing, the U.S. Global Life, U.S. and marketing team. So our team is responsible for all the communications for the United States. And I lead that team. And of course, without relationships, again, we couldn't do what we do because of our business unit leaders. They have that information that we need to be able to share the SCORE message, the SCORE story. So, and even just networking for other, maybe looking for the next opportunity. I will tell you how the world is so small. A lot of the, maybe the last two jobs, or for this one, it was a person who I met either through PRSA or met, through a previous employer. So I was able to secure, a couple of my professional roles because of networking, because of relationships. So this job is all about relationships and networking. That's critically important. And so that means don't burn any bridges, right?
Um, nice, right? And
The world is so small.
yeah, and trying to find you talk about it, the world is small, news travels fast, all of that. Like, you fumbled it here, it's gonna be very hard to cover maybe down the road because everybody is a tight knit community. So that
absolutely
is,
absolutely.
You mentioned something about making sure like your relationships with like newscasters and journalists is important, because we've talked about it. And the only reason I went into that is because we've talked about it in class before, covering how important it is to maintain relationships with, you may not agree with all the time, networks and the news they put out for your companies, but making sure you maintain those, because sometimes the information they have may be beneficial for especially your role when it comes to, okay, something's happening or there's this gossip that's going around. So is there any examples?
Oh, absolutely. I've got a great example. Okay, so rather than give specific examples, I'll just be broad, but hopefully it'll resonate. But I will say that, especially when you are working in crisis management or issues management, let me just say there's always going to be some kind of crisis, whether it's a personnel crisis. I've also worked, and let's go back a bit. So I started at UNCG, and I was an information and communication specialist. That was my very first role. I left there and went to UNC Charlotte to be the university's first media relations manager. So there, I worked with the reporters. I mean, it was my role, me and my team's role. Young manager, a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, it happens.
And I won't say and I won't say failures. I mean, I was able to learn, and I will say collaborating, network partnership. I mean, and relationships sustained me throughout my career. I had some great hires and some, not so great hires. I mean, like it's certainly been a learning experience. But I will say, Aslen, I still maintain contact with every person who either I managed or my supervisor. Like, so again, tells you how critical relationships are, to sort of maintain those over the years. But I've worked with reporters from Time Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, WebMD, in local papers, of course, like Greensboro News and Record, like the Charlotte Observer, the Raleigh News and Observer. But like I said, but then also like the Washington Post and some larger newspapers. And one of the things that I will say, one of the I think the biggest benefits is to cultivate relationships before you actually need to call a reporter. Because there have been times where there may have been a crisis, at an organization, company, or brand that I represented. And I was able to reach out to a reporter whom I trusted, who could help me really shape that story, give them an exclusive. They could really help me shape that story. Because, one of the things that we tell as communicators, we're also advisors to the C-suite and to executive leaders. And one of the things that we say is never say no comment, right? You always need to say something, because if you don't tell your story, somebody else will tell it. A disgruntled employee, a competitor, somebody else is waiting in the wings to tell your story. And the reason that, having those relationships with reporters and others, bloggers, influencers, is because before there's a crisis, you've got the opportunity to, that person knows if you were the reporter, I know I've got a relationship with you. I'll pick up the phone and call, say, Aslen, like, let me share some information with you. You may even share just a little bit. I didn't go off the record very much. I haven't gone off the record very much in my career, only if it provided some background. Would I say, okay, this part is off the record? But again, I didn't make that a practice.
Yeah.
But I had relationships that reporters, even if what I was saying off the record may have been juicy, so to speak, I trusted those reporters enough not to share. It was enough just to be able to give them some background and be able to share with them, sort of context, and then share the story. But when you're in a crisis, you don't want to pick up the phone and try to cultivate a brand new relationship, right? Like you want to already have those relationships in play, which is important. And I mean, a lot of my good friends today have come out of those reporter source relationships. I mean, I can think of 6 or 7 now that we've become really good friends. And actually, 3 of them have transitioned to public relations. So it's a circle, and it's again very small world.
Yes. Look, the news has everybody running towards public relations. It's been a bit chaotic past few years. I don't blame them. I would run there too. So anybody who's ever studied, and you've been throwing it in here, but anybody who's ever studied knows there's several elements and functions of public relations. So it's never just one thing. You're doing a million different jobs, but fortunately there's enough of us to take ground for every position. But what functions or responsibilities have you taken throughout your career?
Yeah, so I started in media relations, the job that I held at UNC, which was my first job. I did a lot of writing for newsletters. One of the things that I learned during that time is I was able to use my writing and communication skills as a reporter. Those skills were transferable. It's the industry was new, and each time you go from one job to the other, it's like the industry might be new, but those communication skills that you're learning right now, Aslen, will benefit you throughout your career. Good writing, effective communication, cultivating, developing and cultivating those relationships. Like those are solid skills that will maintain you and sustain you throughout your public relations career. So I worked first part of my career, it was media relations. The next couple of jobs, I worked in higher education. I mentioned 3 universities. I've worked in K through 12 education, Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. I was a media relations supervisor there, so that was more media relations, but also had a little hand in internal or employee communications during that time. Also developed publications, we produced magazines, we produced newsletters, flyers and brochures, help write website copy, again, crisis communications. If you're working with, because Charlotte Mecklenburg schools, there were like 17,000 employees at the time. I think of 165,000 kids in 150 schools. So there's going to be a crisis.
Yes.
So I really cut my teeth there in crisis communications, issues management, was big, board relations, because there's an elected board. So, being able to help communicate to the board, but also sometimes on behalf of the board. We did very little of that because the board was sort of an elected and a little bit separate function, but there was some role that we played there. And so later in my career, I worked in utilities and healthcare and mental health care and human services, and now I work in financial services and insurance. And everything that I learned from one job, I was able to carry that to the next job. So again, that crisis management, that writing, that again, and you're going to hear these common themes throughout that, cultivating those relationships, all of that was critically important. So everything within, again, communicating to employees, now social media.
Yeah.
So when I first started in public relations, there was no social media. Social media has completely changed the game.
Yes.
So now rather than really, and now newsrooms have, decreased in size. Newsrooms have really shrank in the last 5 to 10 years. Fewer reporters, single reporters have multiple beats. They may cover economics, but then they also might cover healthcare. Whereas each reporter, typically when I worked in the newsroom, I covered healthcare. I was a general assignments reporter. I covered education. You know what I mean? So that's like we had our beats in our niche where we could really get to know our sources. That goes back to those relationships again. But now newsrooms are increasingly small. And so I will say social media has helped us to better share our message directly to our consumer, our audience, whoever that is. And then even we do a lot of, LinkedIn and digital marketing, like advertising, via Facebook and LinkedIn especially. So social media has completely changed the game. So I think and even marketing. So now there's a gray line. Marketing and communications and public relations departments used to be completely separate. Now I'm responsible for not only the communications, but also the client sort of the client cultivation through communications. But also we're responsible for marketing. The events manager reports to me. She also manages advertising and sponsorships. A job before this job, I was, the community outreach senior manager reported to me. So all of those functions now are in one department. And there is still a lot of companies. I mean, we've got a partner company where marketing and public relations is separate. But for the most part, there's a blurred line there now, which kinds of, it makes sense to some degree, I guess.
Which was honestly something that I was talking about with one of my friends, because she's a marketing major and I'm in public relations. And so we were talking about, she's like, you should minor in marketing, you might as well, because it's a part, it's not going to take that many credits and, it's something you're already doing. And so I was like, that's the way that they all kind of blend together. And social media has really given everybody a run for their money in terms of, especially like you said, the newsroom, because I remember I talked about to one of my professors, like some of the news, like they don't share what's important to us all the time. They share what's they know is going to get covered, that's important to the viewers of their community. And so some of the things,
which is still an important function, right? Yeah, absolutely.
You need to know what you're doing. You need to know what's going on in and around you.
Yeah, who your demographic is. So they're writing for or reporting, to their demographic, right? Their target audience, absolutely.
And so social media has always just kind of opened up something for us that's like, oh, nobody knew about, especially like with recent events and, police brutality and all these things. And we're hearing all these stories reemerge about, this happened a year ago, 2 years ago, and nobody reported on it. Nobody heard about it because we had somebody crazy in office, and then a pandemic happened. And so now it's like they're making sure that they report what people on social media are going to have to see now, because they see that that's Twitter is beating them to the punch.
Right.
Right. I'm finding out this on Instagram. I'm like, why is CNN not playing this? MSNBC. And so it's really played a big role in everyone's, in mass communications and journalism. It's really played a big role in
absolutely
changing the roles and how marketing is blended in. Because, now people have a social media, person over there, head of communications or whatever.
Right. So right. And, back in the day when I first started, like the news cycle was like 6 days. Like you knew you had about 5 or 6 days to get your message together and get that out before people found out about it. You know what I mean? Now it's just like 60 seconds, 6 seconds. I mean, if because you can just tweet that out very easily or post it to social media. And I will say, Aslen, a chief medical officer that I worked with, in a previous role, I did some media training, and I brought in, I typically like to bring in like a reporter, just so the reporter can say, hey, here's how, just to give them their perspective. Like, here's how we cover the news as a source for us. Here's what we would expect from you. So when I was doing conducting a media training, the reporters, shared, and I remember these meetings, their budget meetings or the editorial meetings that they have every day. And this is where the reporters will pitch a story like, hey, I'm going to write about this local thing happening in our community, or, what. And a lot of times reporters will localize a national story. If there's something that, happened, like, just say there's a big real estate housing crunch right now, where there's only like 19 days of inventory, right, on the real estate market. People are you've got maybe 15, 20 people bidding on one house,
Yeah.
just because there isn't a lot of inventory right now. So communities are sharing their local stories, just as an example. But this report, I remember him vividly saying, and he and I've become good friends, but he said, before our editorial meetings, we would all look at Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, just social media in general, to sort of see what was trending.
Yeah.
And those are the stories we would pitch to our editor. And our chief medical officer at the time was mortified, because this is, this doctor, this physician, who was just like, what? Like, but that just shows you that he did not realize how important social media has become, because when social media hit the scene, we just thought, it was going to be fleeting. Well, let me tell you, social media is here to stay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. It's like, I just knew Facebook was going to die out. Instagram was not going to last very long. No.
Right. He was mortified. He was like, what? You look at Instagram to get, and it's what you want to do is make sure that you're sharing those stories that people are already interested in. To your point, you talked about your audience, taking that message to your audience directly. Well, like now, if you think about whatever your favorite brand is, whether it's cosmetics or, automobile, you know what I mean? Or automotive, or just whatever your favorite brand is, you can connect directly with it, or even your favorite celebrity. Like you can tweet, Cardi B or LeBron James, and you know what I mean? And you might get a response.
I'm sure several people before me would have thought about it, but definitely will be in the DMs for sure. They'll see it eventually, maybe. I don't know. I only have about 10 that I get, and I still can't see them all the time. So yeah.
Right.
But and you talked about like how the news cycle is so short now. Like the story, the rush to get to a story is like, some people, which kind of takes the integrity out of it sometimes, because you have instances in which like TMZ reports Kobe Bryant's death and everybody goes
right before the family even knows.
Yeah. So it's just like, where do we draw the line? Sometimes
that's a great point.
We don't have to, rush to be first to the story, but
yeah, right. Sometimes you want to be, well, and the other thing is too, when I came through A&T, I mean, having the facts, because one of our faculty members was the editorial page editor at the Greensboro News and Record, and we talked about integrity. There's a couple of reporters who were also adjunct faculty members at A&T during the time I was there, and we talk about integrity, the importance of integrity. Making sure that you've got the facts, making sure you've got both sides, it was fair and balanced. And so, now it is disappointing often to see the level of disinformation. Even PRSA has a campaign now that, we've got committees who are sort of calling out those brands and others who are sort of disseminating that, mis or disinformation, like especially around the vaccine, something so important. But yeah, I agree with you. I think, you've got to sort of maintain that level of integrity and try to, rather than getting out the story first, like, how about let's get the story right?
Yes.
Or let's ensure that you show some courtesy or kindness, and especially when there's the loss of life.
So now, lighten it up a little bit. Tell me about, your biggest challenge. Okay, maybe that's not as light, but like maybe it's your biggest challenge in terms of your career, whether it's COVID or a case you faced or anything like that, or just being a Black woman in your position in PR.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a whole listen. That's a separate story. Please ask your professor to just talk about being Black in corporate America or just in America. I mean, we've really seen that sort of racial reckoning last year. It really sort of came to a head with the death of George Floyd. And so I will say, I think for me, I mean, of course, there's a lot of challenges throughout my career. Because I mean, if you live, you're gonna have to like overcome some adversity, right? Whether it's professional or personal. So I will say, I think for me, the most recent has been COVID-19. I think a lot of public relations practitioners and just especially businesses have had to pivot their thinking, the way that we communicate. We're not in the office. Like my organization, my global organization, we're still working from home. We're still working remotely 1 year later.
Yes.
And so that can pose a challenge and we've realized that we can manage our business successfully remotely, right? We've got offices in 38 countries. We've got clients in over 60 countries. And a lot of what our organization does is sort of, maintain those relationships. And a lot of it was one-on-one. It was personal. You know what I mean? It's just sort of, again, going back to relationships. We had colleagues, we were, traveling, meeting with people. And now, again, like I said, we had to pivot and use, platforms like Zoom and MS Teams. And I think that's been sort of the most recent challenge, is making sure that we're connecting with our audiences, especially those that we would meet in person, that we're connecting with those audiences still in an effective way where they still feel like, we are, we're supporting them the way that we need to. So just, I guess, working in this remote environment and even just, helping, like managing a team, sometimes not being able to be in the room and sort of feed off of each other, that positive energy and those exchange of ideas. But I will say we've been very successful. We haven't missed a beat. A lot of our communication. The other thing is we've had a lot of printed newsletters and printed publication. Well, we've moved everything digital. We've incorporated a lot of video, which we were doing anyway, but we've ramped that up quite a bit. We were, all of our printed publications, they're now solely digital, which is a great thing for us, because we're able to measure and track more. Like when you've got online and electronic publications, you can use the insights and the analytics and, just be able to make sure that you can, because we just send out a newsletter or magazine, you don't know if people are reading it. You can confirm that they received it.
Yeah.
But when you send an electronic newsletter or a digital publication, right away, because you got the click rates, the click throughs, how long they read the publication even. So there's a lot of insights and metrics that we're able to use, which is very important in public relations. We use what we call the RPI. That's research, making sure that you sort of finding out sort of whether it's informal or quantitative research, making sure that the campaign that you're about to launch is going to be feasible, and doing that research to figure out who your audience is, how you're going to connect with that audience. And there's that planning portion where you're planning, the approach that you're going to take. And then there's the implementation part where you're actually executing your campaign or your project or your initiative, whatever it is. And then the evaluation. So, and that's the important part, is just making sure what you're doing works, because you don't want to work just to work, right? You want to make sure that you're landing and resonating with your audience. So I'll say, COVID-19 presented a lot of challenges, but we were also webinars. We did a lot. Rather than sort of in-person events, we hosted a lot of webinars where we were able to position our thought leaders, our scientists, our heads of strategy, our strategic partnerships team. And we had a lot of great resources and sources who shared some of their expertise via webinars. So I will say that as challenging as COVID-19 has been, we have really been able to figure out how resilient we actually are as communicators, and use some of the tools that we already knew that was available, like Zoom. We knew that Zoom was available, but we didn't use it as much as we're using it right now. So you're even taking classes. Are you still taking classes virtually?
Yes.
Or are you in person? Okay.
Yeah. So all of mine that I'm actually taking right now have all been at least in person, online. So we get a lot of that still, collaborative,
Right.
open.
Well, learn now, because you'll be using it forever at this point.
Yeah. So, technology is going to be here. It's going to last. So we might as well figure out how to make it work.
Absolutely.
Work with it,
Absolutely.
So what we talked about your challenges. So what were your, some of your successes or, things like that you've had?
Right. Well, one of the campaigns that I am incredibly proud of is a campaign that discusses like one of the roles that I had just a year ago even. I worked in mental health and human services. So it was a healthcare organization, and we opened up several crisis centers for people who were facing a mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because, I have personally experienced a loss through, from a mental health episode. I mean, that was a very important campaign for me personally, because I've lost a couple of people to suicide. And so one of the things that we were able to do, we started a campaign called Your Crisis Can't Wait. So we opened a crisis center in Raleigh, and we've got these, the organization that I worked for before, we had these across the state, but Raleigh was one of the biggest mental health crisis centers that we opened, or behavioral health crisis centers that we opened. And the campaign was Your Crisis Can't Wait. So that we had radio ads and TV ads. We had an open house so that reporters, communities, elected officials could come and meet the psychiatrist, meet the therapist, see this, beautiful office. Because oftentimes, I mean, when people are ready to get help, they don't know where to go. They have nowhere to turn. And so we really wanted to make sure that this campaign, and we partner with the city of Raleigh and county officials, Wake County officials and elected officials, to make sure that we were the health department. So during an open house, we made sure all of those, and reporters, of course, we made sure all of those folks could come in, see how the sort of the, how the office, worked, like how you accessed mental health care. And you didn't have to wait, because often people are waiting, hours. And there have been some counties here in North Carolina where people have gone into the emergency department and they've waited for close to 24 hours before they could even see a psychiatrist. And that's behavioral health is as important as your physical health. If you were having a heart attack, would you sit in the ED for an hour, for 24 hours? No. And so our campaign really spoke about the urgency of a mental health crisis and how people could access help right away. It was a successful campaign. The first week, and we wanted to make sure people knew that the behavioral health urgent care was accessible. So the first week, as in the first 2 weeks, I think we saw maybe 80 people, which is huge. And we know there are, and the demand only got greater from there. Actually, we won a PRSA award for that particular campaign. I've got my little awards back there, but we actually won an award for our behavior. Your Crisis Can't Wait. We had, billboards. We had that goes into purchasing advertising. We purchase advertising on, urban radio stations, because a lot of times people of color don't have access to mental health care, or don't know that they don't know where to go. So we make sure that we partnered with what we call, Black media or African American publications and radio stations. We made sure we had, I'm losing my words, but signage on the side of buses. That's not what we call it, but just, making it plain. Signage on, side of buses. We make sure we have outdoor or billboard messaging with our message. But it was a great campaign that raised awareness, and hopefully, I will say, I think saved lives. So that's probably been, one that I'm most proud of.
That's good. You should be, because mental health is something, especially in our community, that is not granted to very many of us. It's not either we don't know about it, or we know about it, but we've been given misinformation about it, or whatever it is.
Or we're ashamed.
Or ashamed.
Right. We're ashamed to discuss it.
And I've personally gone through my fair share of mental health issues, problems, anxiety, all that. And the fact that I have been
Right.
supported and gotten the education that I need, and my parents have been supportive of mental health,
Good for you.
so important. So hearing about that campaign that would be my top favorite success as well. So that's great. Um,
Right. And good for you, Aslan. Good for you. Because I mean, again, I mean, oftentimes mental health is something that we don't talk about. But I will say, I am hopeful because we are discussing, and especially your generation, discussing mental health and all of the things that, my parents and sometimes we saw as taboo. I mean, you're really talking about those issues that matter in our community. So I'm so proud of your generation. You're not making the same mistakes. I guess when you know better, you do better, right?
yeah,
So
you have to see it sometimes and be like, oh, we're not gonna make those same choices
right.
better. So for the last one, I'll ask, what advice would you give somebody who is considering or actively pursuing a future career in PR or mass communications?
Right. I love that question. And what I'll share with you and other, you know, uh, prospective and budding professionals, it's to do just exactly what you're doing. Have these conversations with the PR practitioner. Find out what it is. Find out, um, I guess just basically have those conversations. Make sure that you're, talking to your, faculty members about their experiences in public relations if they've had them. And most importantly, two things. One, secure an internship.
Yes.
Every year, we make sure we've got a summer intern who, will recruit, will post it just like we post for any other job,
Mhm.
because one of the things that you want to make sure is that you want to be in a profession that you're going to enjoy, a profession that that aligns with whatever your sort of your core values, your skill set. And so I do think internships are critically important. So I'll say one or two or more internships,
Yes.
just so I mean, because if nothing else, you can determine what it is you don't like about a particular job, right? After doing it. So, I mean, that's just as powerful, if not more compelling, than identifying something that you really like, something where you can sort of, find your purpose, your professional purpose. And then, secondly, a mentor. Make sure that you identify a mentor. Would not be where I am today without the support and the mentorship of people who've been where I am. And I still stay very in close contact with my previous mentors. And then I've got a current mentor who I can call and just sort of talk to about like, and I mean, I share very specific examples, but just someone to bounce ideas off of, someone who, again, like I said, has, been where I am, someone to help you get through those challenges, talk you through,
Yeah.
ideas. And then networking. Networking is vitally important. Join organizations like IABC, which is International Association for Business Communications, I think. IBC, AMA is American Marketing Association. And PRSA, which we discussed. PRSA is the Public Relations Society, Student Society of America. So, join those professional organizations early and begin networking, talk to people. I will tell you, me and all of the colleagues I know on the PSA boards and otherwise have not turned any student requests down. We're actually collaborating with the communications and the student affairs department at Johnson C. Smith University, because I'm located in Charlotte now. And so we're actually partnering with some, colleges and universities to identify opportunities for students and to sort of pair students with mentors. PRSA does that too. They do a great job of pairing students all across the country with mentors. And so I'd suggest, even when I started in financial services and insurance, identified Insurance Marketing and Communications Association, and I'm beginning to be more active with that particular association. Again, just being able to network and share best practices. So 3 things, just to recap. So like mentorship is important, networking is important, and internships are critically important. Because, by the time you graduate from college,
it's like, you haven't done one of those things, you're going to be looking for
exactly. And your employer,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Your employer will say, like, what experience do you have? And if you've been able to say, hey, I've interned at this place or that place, and they know you've got that practical experience that goes beyond what you've learned in the classroom. Book experience is critical. We know that you've got to earn that degree, but also having that practical experience to say, I've applied what I've learned, is just as important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of that typically is the criticism that young professionals have. It's just like, I just got this degree, but I don't have any, they want the experience and they want the education. Yes. I only have one of those.
Yeah.
But if you're able to secure an internship, then that means you'll have the experience. You'll be much more marketable. And like you were just saying, being able to network, then you can reach out to people. Because I would tell you, like I said, like my peers don't mind talking to college students all day long. But when you start looking for a job, if you don't have a relationship with them, then it may be a little bit more difficult to pick up the phone and call somebody at, AT&T or the NFL or, even BET.
Yeah.
Got friends who work there. So, so again, it's important now that you start developing sort of that solid network of professionals who do what you'd like to do.
Definitely laying the groundwork is very important. I'm glad that they do push for that now here at school. Like internships are something you have to have by senior year.
Oh yeah, we did. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's even when I was there, like 100.
Yeah, and so I'm very.
No, when I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's a delay. I apologize. I was going to say 100 when I was at A&T 100 years ago. It was the same way. I mean, we had to have an internship before we graduated, and even my internship employers, I still am in contact with them. So even those relationships are critical, very beneficial.
Overall, I will say relationships. Very, very, very networking is, and I've seen networking play out like for me in itself, just, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, and oh yeah, I got a job from this, I got put on this, and I'm like, oh wow. And so now, we've seen kind of how networking will play out, and that it can only be helpful, it can only be beneficial.
Absolutely. So, absolutely, and maintaining positive relations, you know what I mean? Like, again, don't burn those bridges. Mm-hmm. No. Make sure that you're prepared, make sure you show up on time for meetings, make sure you're communicating effectively with whomever you're going to, schedule a meeting with, all of those things that we already know. So, but I wish you the absolute best. You're going to succeed at whatever you decide to do.
Thank you. And thank you for sitting down.
I'd love to hire you one day.
You may have to. You may have to. I'll definitely be reaching out my senior year, applying everywhere we can, applying everywhere. So,
and I'll help you as much as I can.
But yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to do this with me today. I know you're very busy. Successful people are very busy. So thank you for helping me out with this. Your questions, answers.
It was my absolute pleasure.
So thank you.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for thinking of me and inviting me to have this conversation with you, Aslen. I appreciate it very much.
Yes.